So we're going to be starting a new series today. So this is the first Dharma Night of 2026, and we're starting a brand new series. And the series is called The Best of Refuges. And we're basically going to be looking at what Buddhism is known as the three refuges. So when, at the time of the Buddha would often encounter people, he'd teach them, and the Buddha had an amazing ability to communicate something of his experience to people to the point where they then had a realization for themselves. So the Buddha was able to communicate his experience to other people so that they too had that experience. And often what happened then, how it's written down is when this happened, the person the Buddha was in communication with spontaneously said, to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. So saying to the Buddha, to the enlightened being, I go for refuge, to his teaching I go for refuge, and to the community of those who practice his teachings I go for refuge. So they're the three refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And over 6 weeks we're going to be really exploring them in a lot of detail. So this is the first talk in that series. And I'm going to be looking at the Buddha refuge, so we'll be exploring what the Buddha refuge is together. But before we do that, I want to explore what do we mean by going for refuge. You'll hear it a lot. The more you're around the Buddhist Center, the more you start to learn about Buddhism, you'll hear this term a lot, going for refuge. So I wanted to start by exploring what is that, what does that mean, so that we can then look at refuges. Knowing that. So let's start by looking at, so what is a refuge? So we have that term in our common, when in modern day we talk about that. And it's a state of being safe, basically. It's somewhere where we can go to be safe. It's a shelter. If we're being pursued by danger or difficulty, we take refuge somewhere when we're being pursued, or if we're in danger of something. So we take refuge there. And so what Buddhism is saying is that everyone is searching for refuge. Every single human being is searching for refuge. The search for safety and the search for security is completely natural. It's a completely natural part of being human. We all want to be safe and we all want to be secure, and we want to find the things in our life that are going to give us that. At the time of the Buddha, they would have gone to refuge. Some of the things they would have gone to refuge for would be different. So often in the Pali Canon, they talk about being overly attached to cattle and kind of wheat and living by a stream and all those sorts of things. And that's not necessarily the things that we're attached to now. But there's going to be loads of things in our life that we are looking to for security. We're looking for stability. So when we're looking for safety, when we're looking for security, that's on the basis of believing that it is possible. We think that we are going to be able to find things that can give us safety and can give us security. And I think in our modern life, it is easy to feel quite protected, more so than we would have in any time in history, really. So hopefully we all have a roof over our heads. Obviously some people don't, but lots of us do. We have a roof over our heads, we have central heating, there aren't any predators around kind of lurking around the corner. We don't need to be on guard for that. We've got modern medicine as well, don't we? We're not as under threat from sickness as we would have been in a lot of the history. So I think we can kind of kid ourselves on one level that we're a lot more secure than we are, because life is insecure. That is a fact of life. So despite all of these modern developments, despite the way we've managed to kind of create a world where we can feel like we might be safe and secure, we're in a very insecure situation. So, we could die at any moment. We don't know how that would happen. Any moment that could be taken away from us, and all the things that we're attached to, all the things that we love, at some point will be parted from. And that's a fact of life, and not a very jolly place to start. But that is the truth of things. And on some level we know this. On some level we know that things are insecure. We know that life is insecure. We know that the things that we're attached to, the things that we love, aren't as secure as we think they are. And this gives us this urge to want to find security. It gives us this urge to want to find safety in things. And when we first hear this, when we first start thinking about this, we might think, oh, actually, I don't know if I do that, because on some level we know that things aren't going to last. We know that things change. But if we investigate carefully, if we really look into our experience and how we're behaving, we will see that we are going for refuge to things. We are thinking things are going to give us safety and security. But it's so instinctual, it's so tied in with the way that we see the world as human beings that we can kind of not notice that we're doing it. So yeah, when we're going for refuge to something, the way that we can think about it is that we're relying on something. We're relying on something for safety and security. You could also think of it as we're putting our emotional weight on something. So we've kind of got these emotions and we can kind of put our weight on things, and we choose to put it on certain things. So when we go for refuge to something, that's where we're putting our emotional weight. It's also what we're orientating our lives around. So we all build our lives, we all form our lives in a certain way, and we form it around the things that we think are going to give us safety, that are going to give us stability. And it's also what we turn to in times of need. So life throws up difficulty, life throws up challenge, and there'll be certain places where we go in our time of need. And the thing is, we'll all be doing this all the time with all sorts of different things. But what Buddhism is pointing out, it's not that Buddhism's saying this. All Buddhism's doing is pointing things out how the way they are. Buddhism's saying that some refuges work better than others. Yeah, so some refuges can work more, some refuges can work less. And often the places we look for stability and security can't give it to us. And one translation for this is false refuges. So we can talk about false refuges. And the reason these false refuges don't work is because they're impermanent. They won't last. That's one of the facts of life, is things are constantly changing. And these things that we place, the things that we place are, we rely on and we place our emotional weight on, they're impermanent, they won't last. Also, things won't truly satisfy the deepest longings of our heart. As human beings, we have a deep yearning for satisfaction, but it's very hard to find things that actually meet that deep longing for it. They can also build up our sense of self, so we kind of have a sense of this is me, and then we can extend that to other things or other people. We can kind of build up our sense of self. And also false refuges, they won't bring us to our potential, basically. They won't bring us to the full flowering of enlightenment. So that's what Buddhism's saying our potential is. It's a fully enlightened mind. So one of the languages is false refuges. One of my teachers said something that I quite liked, was that he thought false refuges wasn't the best language for it. When we talk about kind of a false refuge or a true refuge, it can sound a bit moralizing or a bit demonizing. He said a better way to think about it is limited refuges. So it's kind of like they might give us some refuge, but it's limited. It can't give us all of it. So an example is it's like, say, a house. So all of us have a place that we live, and it would be wrong to say that's completely false. Because actually we go home tonight and we have a roof over our head and we can sleep there and we keep our food there and all that sort of thing. So to some extent it does give us a refuge. But like all things, it won't last forever. We can't fully rely on a house because we might be asked to move out, we might not be able to pay the mortgage for some reason, or eventually it will just crumble down and something else will have to be built there. So it doesn't last in that way. It's impermanent. And even if we love our house when we first get it, when we first move in, I've had this multiple times, kind of move into a house and you're like, oh, I love this is the best. And then after a while you start to notice all the little things you don't quite like about it, and you start to notice, oh, actually the bathroom's a bit ugly. or the fan in the kitchen doesn't work, or something like that. And then over time, this thing that started off giving you a lot of joy and a lot of satisfaction starts to be a source of dissatisfaction, and we start craving after something else. So the satisfaction we get from things doesn't last either. We can also become overly identified and attached to things. With a house, you could think, I'm great because I have a nice house. And then it won't lead us in the direction of enlightenment. Like, the more emotional investment we put into a house, the more we pile on our emotional investment, it's not going to lead to a full flowering of our potential. It's something where it does give us a bit of shelter, it does give us some refuge, but it's limited to the extent that it can. And that's probably a helpful way to think about it when we're talking about this. So what we're going to do now, we're going to get into threes and just explore what are some limited refuges or some false refuges that you think you have in your life. So think about all the things in your life that you put your emotional weight on. And it's not to say that these things are bad or wrong or that we need to cut them all out. It's just thinking, where do I put my emotional weight to a disproportionate degree to what this thing can actually give me. So if you want to get into threes and explore that, and then we'll talk about it all together. So who can share with us some limited refuges or some false refuges? None.
When I was a teenager, I was on a quest to get every different type of guitar.
Yeah.
Every different style of guitar.
And so what was that, in what way were you going for refuge to it? Yeah.
I was more attracted to the association and the identity of how I'd be perceived by others and what that guitar would mean for me. It was temporary, of course. Material.
And were you imagining some satisfaction at the end of it?
I wasn't even on that level. I was just like, I want it.
Yeah. No, I remember, when I was growing up, I was into guitars as well, and I remember there was this big amp that I wanted, and it was like, once I get that, then it's going to be the thing, and then end up getting it, and it was just way too big and way too loud, and I could never use it. But it was like the next thing after that. But yeah, it's like thinking, that's going to be the thing, isn't it? Yeah. Any others? Yeah.
I didn't actually discuss it in my talk, but I just thought of it. Other people's approval.
Yeah. And so in what way are you going for refuge to that, and what way is it limited?
It makes you feel good, and then you kind of get addicted, and then one day maybe they won't approve of you, and then, or even if they do approve of you, that's not satisfying.
Yeah. So if you're relying on the approval of other people for your sense of being okay and secure, if you ever then get in a situation where you actually have to stand up against that or go against that, then that's going to be really threatening to that stability and that security, isn't it? So yeah, that's definitely limited. Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
We have romantic relationships.
And so in what way is that limited?
I thought in a way of identifying with the partner, identifying as the person who's with the person.
Yeah, so overly identifying yourself with them, but also expecting more from them than they can actually give you. So we have all of these desires for fulfillment and satisfaction and security, and if we load all of that on one person, that's not an unfair expectation on them, and that won't actually lead us to be in all of these situations we're talking about, whether it's kind of a career or relationships or family or friends or all of those things. By going for refuge to them, it actually will make us less good in that situation, will make us less helpful and open in that situation. So with those things, the more we can be going for refuge to something that will actually work, the better we'll be in all those situations we're in. Yeah. One more? Yeah.
I just kind of thought it now because we didn't discuss it, but I kind of think being a refuge is also going to oneself, and there's kind of like a comfort in just relying on yourself, but it can be obviously quite dangerous. But I do see it's kind of like a retreat, and kind of in that sense.
So not letting yourself be in connection with each other, with other people.
Because it's just with yourself, so it's also hard to find when it's time to
Yeah. That's an interesting point, because actually what we're going to be looking at later on is kind of how do we find what we need, how do we turn inwards and find what we need there. But actually, if that's because we're then not wanting to engage with the world, or we're just trying to retreat from the world, that won't actually be a positive thing. It's an interesting point. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I made a little list of things that we might go to, so you can see if yours are there. So yeah, we had career, relationships, which you mentioned, and then kind of family in with that. Achievements, so going for refuge to the things that we've achieved in our life. I was talking to someone the other day and I was like, I think it's so strange how I'm still so attached to what I did when I was 16. It's like I'm a completely different person, but it's still like, oh yeah, I'm someone that did that. Possessions, ideas. I definitely go for refuge to ideas and then feel really, if I ever think anyone's going to disagree with them, then get your back up about them. Status, money, kind of groups that we're a part of. Religious institutions, which is one I came up with, which I think is definitely true. I remember a couple of years ago, a few of my friends kind of left, they just moved elsewhere at the LBC, and it definitely kind of shook my perception of things. It was like, oh no, I thought this was like this, and I was kind of imagining it was going to be forever. But actually things are constantly changing and constantly evolving and morphing, and people move away and people come. So can't go for refuge, things like that. Hobbies, praise, which is kind of what you were saying. Our identity, kind of just like who we think we are. Food, entertainment, productivity, our looks, ideologies, and spiritual experiences. So there's some of the things that, some of my list that I came up with. And obviously, you were all exploring your own ones there. And like I said before, if we don't go for refuge to these things, we'll just be a better person in all of those situations. So it's not that we kind of need to cut all of those things out or they're all bad or wrong, but the more we can be going for refuge to something that actually works, the better we'll be in all of those situations. If we can see, obviously there you talked about some different things, if you can see that they're limited, what then? What do we then do? And Buddhism says that there are true refuges. So it points out that there are things that we go for refuge to, there are things that we rely on that aren't going to work, that will let us down. But there are things that we can rely on. And the way that Buddhism articulates these things it says it's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And what I want to point out here is that it's not true just because the Buddha said so, in a way. The Buddha wasn't interested in imposing things on people from the outside. He wasn't interested in kind of telling people what to do. What the Buddha was interested in was going deeply within and finding universal human truths. So he went deeply into his own mind, and he pointed out, and then he went deeply into his own mind. He then communicated to others to point out deep human truths. So when we're talking about all these things, it can sound a bit like we're talking about Buddhism, but what we're really talking about is universal human truths that the Buddha illuminated through his own inner work, through working on his mind. So he's interested in getting to the heart of what it means to be human. And he said the things that we can rely on, the things that can give us security, are these three refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They embody the deepest longings of the human heart. If we really go inwards into the depth of the heart, we'll see that these ideals of Buddhism, they're natural ideas, natural ideals. They lead to a clear seeing, and it's just revealing what's already there. It's not trying to impose something else, it's trying to reveal what's already there. So over the coming weeks, we're going to be looking at all the jewels. So we're going to be looking at the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But tonight we're going to be focusing on the Buddha. So that's the ideal of the enlightened mind. And we can we'll be looking at how can the Buddha be a true refuge in our lives. So that's what we're looking at in the second half. But for now, let's go and have some tea. Which is a limited refuge, but it's nice. So let's go next door and we'll have some tea. So in the first half we looked at the refuges. We looked at false or limited refuges, and then we talked about that Buddhism teaches us that there are true refuges. And tonight we're going to be focusing on the true refuge of the Buddha. And so when the Buddha talked about these refuges, he said, having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. So that's what he's saying. These refuges have the possibility of releasing us from all suffering. And so that's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That's what these are getting at. The Buddha said once, he said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. So that's what the Buddha's interested in. He's interested in communicating to us how we can free our minds from suffering. So often when we talk about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, we talk about them as the three jewels. So sometimes it's talked to as the three jewels. And when we say jewels, we're talking about them as something precious, kind of loving them and admiring them, holding them up as something beautiful. But we also talk about them as the three refuges. And when we talk about them as the three refuges, it's kind of bringing out a different quality in them. So when we talk about the three refuges, we're seeing them as ultimately reliable. So we looked at limited refuges, they're not ultimately reliable, whereas he's saying these are ultimately reliable. They're ultimately meaningful. They're ideals that we can commit ourselves to, and through committing ourselves to, they're ideals that we can become. So they're not just abstract things that we can think about and talk about, they're ideals that we can become, so our mind can become more and more infused by them and we'll experience life more and more like that. So going for refuge, if we're talking about going for refuge to the three refuges, it involves seeing the Buddha as our ideal, seeing the Dharma as the path we want to follow, and seeing the Sangha as the people we're committed to practicing alongside, but also practicing in the footsteps of. So the Sangha is talking about the people that have practiced since the time of the Buddha, but also the people we're practicing with around us. So essentially it's a commitment to a complete transformation of our whole being. When we go for refuge, we're committing to a complete transformation of our whole being. And when I'm talking about this, I want everyone to bear in mind this is a very high bar that we're talking about here. Not expecting people to come through the door for the first time tonight and then think, oh yeah, I'm going to go for refuge. You might, but really what I'm talking about here is a very high ideal. So I'm kind of holding up the highest ideal of what it means to practice Buddhism. And the more we practice, the more we'd hopefully find that actually these do become more and more important in our lives. So yeah, we're focusing on the Buddha refuge. And the Buddha means the awakened one, the enlightened one. So he's someone that through his own effort, or talking about Buddha in general, someone through their own effort has gained enlightenment, has freed themselves from suffering. And so to go for refuge to the Buddha implies that we're fully convinced that the Buddha gained enlightenment. So the Buddha that lived 2,500 years ago, we're fully convinced that the Buddha has gained enlightenment. So this is the development of human qualities, basically. The development of positive human qualities to their utmost degree. So they're qualities that we'll all have to some extent, developed to their highest pitch, to the fullness of them. So that's the qualities of love, the qualities of kindness, of compassion, of wisdom, of fearlessness. All these qualities that we'll all experience, that will all manifest to some extent, is develop that to the highest degree and kind of getting rid of all the things that block those experiences. So what blocks that is greed, hatred, and delusion. We think of them as craving, aversion, and ignorance. These three poisons, how Buddhism calls them. And the Buddha is someone who overcame greed, hatred, and delusion. He said, there's a thorn in the heart of human beings, and I've plucked it out. So he's someone that's managed to remove the thorn of greed, hatred, and delusion. And that wisdom that he gains through pulling out that thorn has liberated him from all suffering. Yeah, so to go for refuge to the Buddha means that we're fully convinced of all of that. So that's a big ask. That's a big ask. So if you're fairly new to the Buddhist Centre, you may be thinking, I'm not fully convinced about that. And I think that's right, that's fair enough if you're not fully convinced by that. Because actually it takes a long time to be convinced about that. I definitely wasn't convinced about that when I first started practicing Buddhism. When I read about Buddhism, I had a strong response, and a strong emotional response to hearing the Dharma. I had a strong response to reading the Dharma, but I definitely wasn't fully convinced on the spot that the Buddha definitely gained enlightenment. And we'll need to have practiced Buddhism for ourselves as well. I think that's the other thing. That conviction comes through practicing the path that the Buddha laid out. I won't say too much about that path because that will be covered next week. But we need to practice the path that the Buddha laid out and then see enough change in ourselves to trust where that path leads. So by practicing, we'll find that our mind starts to change. We start to become more kind, more truthful, more courageous, all of those things. And the more we start to realise that that's happening in our life, the more faith that gives us that actually that would be possible for a human being. And not only would it be possible for a human being, we've become more and more convinced that that's a possibility for us, that that's something we can do. Because that's what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that everyone can do what he did. Everyone can gain the mind that he gained. If we couldn't, it wouldn't be a refuge. If it was just a case of he's someone out there that's done something good, it wouldn't be a refuge for us. The reason why the Buddha is a refuge is because that's possible for us as well. Yeah, so going for refuge, it's not just being convinced about the Buddha's enlightenment, it's committing ourselves to developing those qualities too. So committing ourselves to developing wisdom, committing ourselves to develop compassion, to transform our craving, to transform our aversion, to make our mind more wise. Another way we can think about wisdom is just having a bigger and bigger perspective. So much of the time our perspective can narrow and shrink and get tight around things. Whereas when we're developing wisdom, it's kind of like we're making our perspective bigger and bigger, so we can hold all of the ups and downs of life in a perspective where we're not thrown around by it. And we're just trying to become more creative and more compassionate and more wise in every area of our lives. I think that's another thing, is it's not just trying to do it in a particular place, it's trying to infuse our whole life with those qualities. So yeah, another thing that going for refuge implies, if we're going to go for refuge to the Buddha, it implies that we regard the Buddha as our teacher, as our primary teacher, our primary influence. So it's not the Buddha is one influence among many. To go for refuge to the Buddha is deciding, okay, this is the Buddha is my teacher, this is the path that I'm following. And this is also a big ask. When I first came along, I'd been meditating quite a bit. I was convinced about meditation. I started to realise that I needed to change how I was living outside of meditation. And I thought, okay, Buddhism will probably have something to say. But I was very much like, I'll take the good bits and I'll leave the rest. I was like going into it that I was like, okay, this can be an influence among all my other influences. I can leave all the stuff that I don't need. We have so many influences in our lives, and in a way that's good. We're living in a time where we can be in receipt of so much wisdom. It's actually unthinkable. It's become so commonplace now for us to be able to access all information anywhere that we don't quite gauge how amazing that is, that we have access to all of these things. But it comes with a cost as well. We're influenced by so many things in our lives. We're constantly receiving so many messages from so many different sources, often conflicting or kind of not cohering. And these are things that we're excited by and we can kind of try and put into practice in our lives. So it's not that this is bad, but to go for refuge to the Buddha means that we're saying that the Buddha is the primary influence in my life. This is the way I want to live, in the way that the Buddha says, not what everyone else says. It's not that there won't ever be any overlap between those things, But it's to go for refuge to the Buddha means it's saying like this is my primary teacher. And just a note on that, just to say that Buddhists, true Buddhists, shouldn't be intolerant of other paths as well. So if we're going for refuge to the Buddha, that means we're saying this is the path that I want to follow. This is the path that I am choosing to follow. Not the path I have to follow or what I've been told I should follow. This is the path that I am choosing to follow. But no Buddhist should be intolerant towards other people following different paths. Yeah, so to try and forcibly impose a Buddhist view onto other people would go thoroughly against the Buddha's teachings. So it's saying, it's to go for refuge means that we're fully convinced and we fully want to do that, but it's within a tolerant context of being open to other people doing different things. Okay, so it's important as well to try and get a feeling for the Buddha. So I've been talking about the Buddha. Maybe you've heard a lot about the Buddha already, but maybe you haven't. Maybe this is one of your first times at the Buddhist Centre, one of your first times hearing about the Buddha. And it's really good if we're interested in what I'm talking about, if we're interested in having a mind that's more free. It's important that we start to learn about the life of the Buddha. And we can do that. There's lots of the life of the Buddha was well documented. After the Buddha gained enlightenment, he taught for lots of years. 50 years? I don't know. Some years. Decades. And throughout that time, he spoke to different people. And the teachings that he gave were memorized, and the incidents in his life were memorized. And you can see that the Buddha was not an ordinary human being, but you can see the Buddha's humanity in those stories. You can see the Buddha's humanity in the way that he engages with people and he interacts with people. So it's not just that the Buddha's left a bunch of conceptual teachings for us to learn. There's a whole life there that we can engage in through the Buddhist text. So there's the Pali Canon, which is the earliest sources of the Buddha's life and the Buddha's teachings. And there's loads of lovely stories in there that really give us a sense of what the Buddha was like, how the Buddha interacted with people. And that's one way that we can get to know the Buddha. That's one way that we can start to get a feeling for this enlightened mind. So I just want to draw out a couple of those stories just to give us a sense of the Buddha. So there's one story which is kind of titled "The Case of Dysentery," and this was the Buddha and his companion Ananda. What they would do, they'd go around, and there'd be lots of monks around living together, and the Buddha would go around occasionally, and he'd go and visit them, and he'd ask them how they were doing. He'd ask them how they were keeping, how their practice was going, and then give them teachings to help them on their way. And then one time, he came along, and there was a monk there who was very sick. He was kind of on the floor. The other monks had left him because he was ill. He couldn't go and collect food, so they kind of left him there. The Buddha came in, Ananda came in, they saw him. He was on the floor. He was covered in mess. And the Buddha and Ananda, they saw him. And what they did, the Buddha, although the Buddha was the teacher, he was this enlightened master who had thousands of followers. When he saw this monk in need, he just straight away went and helped. So him and Ananda, they just went and they helped and they cleaned him up and they got him some water, they got him some food, sat him down into bed and they just looked after him. So the Buddha wasn't someone who was too big and too mighty to kind of do those things. He would give these big discourses on reality, but he'd also be there and helping people. And then when the other monks came back, he basically told them off, which I think is another thing about the Buddha, is that he will reprimand people, but in a way that they need to hear. He's not just kind of like just always going around smiling and being like everything's fine. If he needs to tell you off, he'll tell you off. And so he said to them, you're monks, you've gone forth from the home. You don't live with family, you don't have wives, you don't have parents, all you have is each other. It's your job to look after each other, because if you don't look after each other, no one will. It's your duty to care for each other. And he concluded with the famous statement, "Whoever would tend to me should tend to the sick." So he saw these people who had great reverence for him, but were neglecting their friends, were neglecting others. And he was saying, whoever would do that for me, you should do that for anyone who's sick. So I think that's it's a nice story that really kind of evokes his willingness to go and help wherever was needed, kind of this spontaneous compassion. And then the other story is near the end of the Buddha's life, he went on this big tour. Even though his body was basically falling apart, he was really sick, and his body was kind of breaking. Basically, he said to Ananda, "The only time that I'm not in pain is when I'm in deep meditation." So his body was just in pain all the time. But despite that, he decided, I want to go on a tour of basically all of India where he'd been teaching, and he wants to give any final teachings that people feel like they need. So he wanted to go and see all of his disciples and make sure that they were clear on the Dharma, they were clear on his teachings, and that he could answer any questions that they would have, even though it would have been much easier for him to just stay still. He kind of did that long journey in the pain that he was in. And then very near the end of his life, the Buddha was kind of lying down, very close to death. And Ananda, who was his attendant, Ananda wasn't at that point wasn't enlightened. He did gain enlightenment, but at that point he wasn't enlightened, and he was really upset. The Buddha was his best friend, he was his teacher, he was this amazing person, and he was about to lose him. And Ananda was really upset, and he kind of left the room, and he went out and he was weeping, and he was crying. And the Buddha noticed that Ananda wasn't there, and he asked, "Where's Ananda?" And one of the disciples said, "Oh, he's outside. He's upset." And then the Buddha said, "Bring him to me. Bring Ananda to me." And so Ananda came back in, and the Buddha it's interesting here the Buddha was very kind to Ananda, but he also used that opportunity to point out a wisdom teaching. So he very kindly said to Ananda, "I've taught you that all things were impermanent. I've taught you that, I've said that, and I too am impermanent. Did you think I was going to last forever? I don't last forever, nothing lasts forever." So he used that chance to kindly point him towards wisdom. But then he just takes an opportunity to just rejoice in Ananda. He takes the opportunity just to draw out all of Ananda's positive qualities, saying how everyone loves Ananda. When Ananda speaks the Dharma, everyone loves hearing it from Ananda, and he goes in this big long rejoicing of Ananda as well. So there's that really human connection where he's like using his opportunity to still keep teaching, but also use it to lift someone up and show him that kindness. So reading about the Buddha and hearing about the Buddha's life can be a practice of recollecting the Buddha and allowing us for the Buddha to become more and more of a real presence in our lives. But we can also do a practice of recollecting the Buddha. There's a more formal practice of recollecting the Buddha, and it's called Buddhana Smriti or Buddhana Nusati. And it's where practitioners, Buddhists, deliberately keep the Buddha in mind. So that's both in and out of meditation. They hold the Buddha in their mind. So there's a nice incident. Well, there's a sutta in the Pali Canon with a man called Pingiya, and this is an old man called Pingiya, and he lives far away from the Buddha. So he's someone who's met the Buddha. He converted to become a disciple of the Buddha, but he lives far away from him, and he's too old to travel. So he's not able to make the journey to be with the Buddha physically. But he says that he's never apart from the Buddha. He's never apart from the Buddha, because even though he couldn't be with him physically, he was never apart from him because he constantly recollected him. He constantly held the Buddha in his mind. So he said, "There is no moment for me, however small, that is spent away from Gautama," which is the Buddha, "from this universe of wisdom, this world of understanding. With constant vigilance, it is possible for me to see him with my mind as clearly as with my eyes, in night as well as day. And since I spend my nights revering him, there is not to my mind a single moment spent away from him. So this is a really good evocation of what recollection of the Buddha does. It means that wherever we are, it's possible to be holding the enlightened mind in our mind. We can hold those qualities of the Buddha in our mind wherever we go, and we can be influenced by them in the same way that we would be if we were with the Buddha physically, or if we were with someone like that physically. Okay, so we're gonna do another meditation in a minute. So I'm just going to wrap up. So it's helpful to relate to enlightenment in an embodied form. Yeah, so we've talked about these qualities of the enlightened mind. We've talked about the quality of wisdom. We've talked about the quality of compassion. There's talk in Buddhism of emptiness, of pure awareness, all of these things. But an embodied figure of the Buddha, an embodied figure of the enlightened mind, can touch us on much deeper levels. If we can imagine an embodied form of the enlightened mind, we're going to have much more emotional engagement with those qualities. So enlightenment gives us a goal to work towards, but what enlightenment is it's all of those qualities. So the Buddha represents all of those qualities together, and so by bringing the Buddha to mind, we can cultivate more and more of those qualities within us, and it's something that we can experience from within ourselves. So it's not that we can just go for refuge to the Buddha out there, the person of the Buddha. What we can do is we can cultivate a mind that becomes more and more like the Buddha. And one of the ways to do that is to dwell on the image of the Buddha, to dwell on the figure of the Buddha, to dwell on the life of the Buddha. And as we hold an enlightened being in our mind, it's as if something of their being starts to rub off on us. Yeah. So as we dwell on kindness, it's like more kindness starts to emerge in us. As we dwell on wisdom, more wisdom starts to emerge in us. As we dwell on fearlessness, we start to become more fearless. And so by holding it in mind, it's like those qualities become more and more manifest in our lives. So by dwelling on the Buddha, by going for refuge to the Buddha, the enlightened mind starts to awaken within us. So it's as if going for refuge to the Buddha, we kind of little by little start to become more and more like the Buddha. So that's what we're doing. When we're talking about going for refuge to the Buddha, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make our mind more and more like the Buddha. And yeah, one of the ways that we can do that is by engaging in a visualization of the Buddha. So that's what we're going to try now. I'm going to lead us in a visualization, and we're going to bring to mind the Buddha, and we're going to be in connection with those qualities of wisdom and compassion. So if you've never done anything like this before, just throw yourself in. You've all imagined things before, that's what we're doing. And yeah, the more we engage with it, the more we'll get in touch with those qualities. Okay, so start by making yourself comfortable. So make any last adjustments you need. And when you're ready, closing your eyes. Let's just start by connecting with the sensations in our body. So doing your best to tune into your direct experience. And try and move away from the realm of ideas and more into the realm of your felt experience. So again, feeling your contact with the ground. So as we go through this visualization, try and make it as vivid as you can, but don't worry about how clear it is. The most important thing is just having a sense of being where we're being and being with the Buddha as we go through it. So start by imagining yourselves in the middle of a clear blue sky. And clear blue skies extending in all directions, above, below, all the way around you without end. And then you find yourself on a grassy plain, so stretching out in front of you and around you. And in the distance you see snow-capped mountains. And above is the clear blue sky. Now a little way in front of you appears a grove of trees. The leaves are a rich green. And in the middle of this grove is a central tree. And strong and thick. Roots going deep into the ground. And in front of this tree there's a patch of grass made into a seat. And sitting there at the base of the tree is the Buddha Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha. So dressed in robes, begging bowl in his lap. But his skin is glowing, almost as if it's gold. An expression of deep peace, deep contentment, completely at ease. And we find ourselves sat in front of the Buddha, also sitting in meditation. And then we find that the Buddha is looking at us. And he's gazing at us with an expression of complete kindness, complete care and compassion. We're being seen fully and completely. As if the Buddha knows every part of us, every part of our mind, and is still seeing us with complete kindness and compassion. So just allowing yourselves to be seen in this way. Allowing ourselves to be seen with the kindness, the compassion and the wisdom of the enlightened mind. Noticing how it feels to be in the presence of those qualities. And then at the center of the Buddha's chest, the heart center, a golden light begins to glow. And then a beam of light extends from the Buddha's heart into our heart. The light from the Buddha's heart is traveling along this beam and entering into us. And seeing if we can allow our heart to open to the Buddha's influence. As the Buddha's qualities are coming from the Buddha into us. So we're receiving the Buddha's kindness, the Buddha's wisdom, the Buddha's compassion. And the more we're in connection with those qualities, the more they start to come to fruition within us. as if we're being filled with all of the qualities of the Buddha, all of the qualities of the enlightened mind. And if it helps, you could begin to hear the Shakyamuni mantra travelling along the beam of light into your heart. It's Om Muni Muni, Maha Muni, Shakyamuni, Swaha. Om Muni Muni, Maha Muni, Shakyamuni, Swaha. So now sitting here, allowing yourself to be seen by the Buddha and to receive the light of the Buddha's qualities into your heart, hearing the mantra of the Buddha. Knowing that the more we engage with these qualities, the more we bring these qualities to mind and receive them from the Buddha, the more kind, compassionate and wise we are becoming. So really allowing yourself to be seen by the Buddha and receiving the light of all of his qualities. And now the beam of light returns back into the body of the Buddha. But all the qualities that we've received remain within us. The kindness, the wisdom and the compassion remain within our hearts and within our minds. And we're sat there in the presence of the Buddha, having absorbed all the enlightened qualities. And then the trees around the Buddha dissolve into bright white light. And then they're absorbed into the heart of the Buddha. And the grassy plain and the mountains also dissolve into bright white light. And then they too are absorbed into the heart of the Buddha. And the Buddha too dissolves into bright white light. Beautiful, shining, dazzling, bright white light. And then that light expands out to fill the whole of the clear blue sky. So the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha fill the whole of space in all directions. As if we're completely surrounded by the qualities of the enlightened mind. And the blue sky fades away. And for a few moments, just sitting, staying in stillness, absorbing all the effects of the meditation. Okay, so that brings our evening to a close. Yeah, it's really nice to be here with you tonight. Lovely to see you all at the start of this new year. So yeah, we'll be continuing this theme next week, where we'll be looking at the Dharma refuge. So hopefully by the end of this whole series, you have a really good sense of what we're really talking about and how that applies to our lives.